Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Sneha and Philip. Sneha disappeared from Manhattan, New York on the 10th of September 2001, the day before the 9/11 attacks took place. Due to this, Sneha's disappearance is very much intertwined with the attacks that happened on 9/11. There's kind of two scenarios. Either the 9/11 attacks very much slowed down the efforts to find Sneha, or she was a victim of them herself. And today I'm going to talk you through what we know happened to Sneha before she disappeared and why we think she could possibly be a victim of the 9/11 attacks. So Sneha was born in India on the 7th of October 1969. She was obviously born to her two parents and she was the middle child of three. She had her older brother Ashwin and her younger brother, who was referred to in many articles sometimes as Kevin, sometimes as John. Now I don't think she had two younger brothers, so I think maybe Kevin or John is a nickname. I'm going to refer to him in this video as John, but I'm very aware that his name might actually be Kevin. It's very confusing. When Sneha was young, I couldn't figure out exactly what her age was. Her parents moved to upstate New York, and Sneha absolutely excelled in America. She was always top of her class, she was very smart, she was very creative. She did really well and she ended up going to university. She attended Johns Hopkins University before graduating and deciding to enroll in the Chicago School of Medicine. Like her father, she wanted to train to become a doctor, and it was at the Chicago School of Medicine where she met her soon-to-be husband, Ron Lieberman. Now, Ron was actually in the year below Sneha, so in order for them to graduate together, Sneha actually took a year out, and she spent a year travelling around Italy before returning, doing her last year, so her and her future husband could graduate at the same time. And after they graduated, they both moved to Manhattan and moved into an apartment in East Midtown, and then they got married. They got married in May 2000, and after they got married, they decided they wanted to move somewhere bigger, so they moved into Battery Park City, in what I can assume was a very nice, large apartment. Now, Battery Park City is located in Lower Manhattan and it's right next to the financial district. So I think we can assume that Sneha and Ron were both doing quite well for themselves because this wasn't a very cheap area to live in. Continuing their medical training, the two of them both got internships at New York City hospitals. Ron had an internship at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx, and Sneha went to the Cabrini Medical Center in the East Village. However, later she moved to St. Vincent's Medical Center in Staten Island, but we'll get into the reasons of why she moved later on. She was in her third year at St. Vincent's Medical Center when she disappeared. The last time Sneha was seen was at 7:18 p.m. She was seen on camera in the Century 21 department store. Century 21 is a discount designer department store located literally across the street from where the World Trade Centers were. So the last time she was seen, she was literally a 30-second walk from the World Trade Centers, but this was a good 14 hours before the centers fell. Now in Century 21, Sneha spent about $500 to $550 on her husband's American Express card, and she bought things like bed linen, pantyhose, lingerie, she bought a dress, and she bought 3 pairs of shoes. She was last seen on the CCTV walking out of the store carrying 2 bags, and the CCTV footage, which her husband actually spent 3 weeks trawling through trying to find any sight of his wife. She was actually in the sort of jackets, coats department just trying on jackets. Now, I've been to Century 21 quite a few times and this is not a well organised department store, I can tell you that for nothing. It is messy, there's stuff everywhere, all of the sort of shelves are really close together, the ceilings and parts of it are really low. It's just a very weird store, and I can only imagine Ron spending 3 weeks trawling through this footage. It must have been so difficult because there's just so many people all the time. It's just mess. People are trying to get those bargains and it is not a tidy place. So that was 7:18 p.m. when we know Sneha was still alive, but let's look at the events of that day. Now, Sneha actually went for lunch with her husband that day, and her husband Ron went to work about 1 p.m. However, Sneha herself had the 10th and 11th both off work, so her plans were to clean the apartment and water the plants and just, I don't know, she didn't really have any major plans, she just wanted to make sure the apartment looked nice. At about 2 p.m. she logs into an online messenger service and spends about 2 hours chatting to her mum online. Now, they're not talking about anything in particular, just small talk about life. There's nothing that interesting in there apart from one thing that Sneha said, and she said that she was going to check out a restaurant at the top of the North Tower. It was called the Windows of the World restaurant. Her friend was getting married there next spring or something, so she wanted to go and check it out and just see what it was like. And she did mention that to her mum. Now, I don't know how certain this is. I definitely did see it in a couple of sources, but nothing 100%. Now she logs out from a chat with her mum about 4:30 p.m, and at 5:15 she's caught on security camera leaving her apartment building, and she goes to the dry cleaners before heading to Century 21 where she does her shopping. However, there have been reports that Sneha wasn't shopping alone. A store clerk came forward about a week after Sneha disappeared and said that she remembered Sneha in the store, but she wasn't there alone. She was there shopping with a friend, somebody who Sneha actually referred to and said, "This is my friend." She said the woman was also Indian American. She was about 5'2", about 115 pounds, and they were definitely sitting there chatting. Apparently they were trying on shoes together. Now, like I said again, I'm sort of drawing on a little bit of personal experience here. I've been to Century 21, I've sat in the shoe area trying on shoes myself, and the benches are very small, and maybe Sneha wasn't there with somebody, maybe she just happened to sit next to somebody, they're both trying on shoes, and had a little bit of chat, a bit of small talk. I do think that's a possibility because it is a very crowded store usually. And maybe Sneha did refer to her as a friend, but not meaning a deep, close personal friend, maybe just someone she just met. I'm not sure what Sneha's personality was and if she would start random chat with a stranger and then refer to them as a friend. I know it's not something I would do, but I know people who are like that. Or maybe the woman was a genuine friend, but what we do know is this woman that Sneha was talking to has never come forward. That's almost all we know about Sneha's final day. Now, Ron arrives home from work about 11:30. His shift was meant to be 1 till 8, but he sort of got held up at work. He worked up in the Bronx, so he didn't get home till late, about 11:30, midnight-ish. And when he arrives home, his wife isn't actually there. Now, Ron didn't find this particularly odd. It didn't worry him in any way because Sneha did this quite often. She would go out drinking in the evening and then just crash over at a friend's or a family member's house and not say anything. So Ron was a little bit put out by it and made a note to sort of say to Sneha the next morning, like, "Why didn't you call me and let me know? What's that about? We've already discussed this." But he wasn't worried. He just goes to sleep because he's got to be up very early the next morning. He's got to be at work for 8 a.m, so he has to wake up at 6, and that's what he does. He wakes up at 6 a.m. His wife still isn't home, still not really worried about it, so he just gets up and goes to work. Now, this is the 11th of September 2001, and we all know what happened just before 9 a.m. on that day. Now, just a side note here, later phone records show that about 4 a.m, somebody had called Ron's cell phone from the apartment landline. Now, Ron said that although he doesn't remember doing it, it's most likely that he woke up at 4 a.m. and was subconsciously checking his voicemail, maybe trying to see if Sneha had called him. So Ron arrives at work for an early meeting at 8 a.m, and we all know what happens at 8:46. At 8:46 a.m, hijackers crashed the American Airlines Flight 11 into the North Tower. 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 crashes into the South Tower. Manhattan comes to a complete standstill. Apart from the emergency services, Ron, obviously working at a hospital, rushes to help his hospital prepare for the influx of injured victims they're about to get, but nobody arrives. His hospital is up in the Bronx, so it's a long time away, and because Manhattan's a complete standstill, nobody can get that far, nobody can get to their hospital. And as horrible as it sounds, when the planes first hit, people weren't injured, it was instant death. In total, 2,977 people, not including the hijackers, died in the 9/11 attacks. The towers and the surrounding area alone, 2,606 people died. And as of today, Sneha Phillips' name is on that list. Sneha is counted as one of the victims of 9/11. But was she actually a victim of 9/11, or was it just a coincidental event and something else led to her death? Now, like I said, Ron was at work in the Bronx when he hears about the attack on the towers. Now, when the first plane hits, everyone assumes it was an accident. Nobody ever assumed that it was a terrorist attack. This was 2001, and terrorist attacks didn't really happen back in those days. People were living in no fear of terrorist attacks, very much unlike today where terrorist attacks are sadly a very normal part of life. In 2001, it wasn't expected, so when the plane hit, everyone just thought it was an accident. It was only when the second plane hit the South Tower 17 minutes later that people began to question things. So Ron, like I said, prepares his hospital for the influx of patients that never came, and then desperately tries to get in contact with his wife. Now, I don't know if Sneha had a cell phone, a mobile phone, or not. I've seen very conflicting articles on it. Some articles say she did have one, some say she didn't. But I'm going to assume that when Ron was trying to get hold of his wife, he was most likely calling the apartment landline. It's calling and calling and nobody is answering. So he actually gets a lift in an ambulance down to the bottom of Manhattan, and when the ambulance can't go any further, he gets out and rides a bike, steals a bike and rides it the rest of the way. And this took him 6 hours. This is how much of a standstill Manhattan came to. It took him 6 hours to get from the Bronx down to lower Manhattan. Of course, 6 hours later, blockades had been put in place, people were being evacuated, they weren't allowed near the site of the attack. However, Ron managed to get through on his medical credentials, and he actually managed to get to his apartment block, and when he got there, he couldn't get in. The power had gone out and the doors to the apartment building were electric, so he just couldn't get in. So he's desperately trying to get in to see if his wife's in there, and he sees somebody's lit a candle in one of the windows. Ron, using a small flashlight, manages to get this person's attention, and when he gets the person's attention, he asks this person to go up to their apartment and see if Sneha's there. So this is what the person does. And when he comes back down, he says that there's nobody in the apartment, there's no answer. Ron at this point is obviously terrified, but he can't get into his apartment building, so he has to go stay with a friend. And he's still trying to get through to see her, trying to call her. But of course, it wasn't just that Sneha wasn't answering, it's that all the lines were completely blocked. Everyone across America, possibly people across the world, were trying to get in contact with people, relatives, friends that lived in Manhattan. And the lines were just jammed. There was no way he could get through. Immediately, Ron and Sneha's family leap into action. They start to print out missing people's posters. They print out 5,000 posters with Sneha's face on it, asking anyone for any information about her. And on any normal day, this might have done the trick. There were hundreds of thousands of posters put up across the city, everyone searching for their lost loved ones. Ron had assumed that Sneha had spent the night before around either her brother or her cousin's house. Both lived just within a few blocks of where Sneha usually went out drinking. But Ron spoke to them and realised that Sneha hadn't stayed with either of them. And he also contacted a lot of her friends, a lot of their mutual friends, and nobody had seen Sneha the night before. And this is when they started to question that maybe something had happened to her on the 10th. Ron reports her missing to the NYPD, but of course the NYPD had over 9,000 people reported missing to them, and as much as you want the police to be able to do something, it was a complete standstill. Nobody knew what to do and the police were totally overwhelmed. And although the police took in Sneha's missing persons report, there wasn't much they could do. So Ron goes to the media and he starts telling the media about his beautiful wife who has disappeared. However, as soon as he says that she disappeared on the 10th and not the 11th, they lose all interest. They don't want to talk to him and he is just at a complete loss as what to do next. So Ron returns back to their apartment in the early morning of the 12th. The power's back on and he's able to get into the building. However, when he goes up to his apartment, it becomes very clear that there's been nobody in there. The morning before, he'd gone to work and left his windows open, and the windows were still open, and the entire apartment was covered with dust and debris from the fall of the towers. It was just thick dust, and there were no footprints. Nothing had moved the night before. The argument is that if Sneha had come home, she would have closed the windows, there would have been footprints, she would have tried to clean up, and she just hadn't. The only things that suggested any life in his apartment were their 2 cats who had been playing in the dust. Absolutely desperate for help, Ron turns to his brother-in-law John and tells John to go to the media and to talk about Sneha, but tells him not to mention that she went missing on the 10th. However, John goes to the media and takes it one step too far. He spins this story about how he was on the phone with his sister, and she says that she needs to go and help the victims of the 9/11 attack. The exact quote is, "I was on the phone with her and she told me she couldn't leave because people were hurt. She said, I have to help this person, and that's the last thing I heard from her." John later admitted that it was a lie and he was just desperate for anyone to help his sister because nobody seemed to care that she was missing. And of course people cared, but everyone was missing. It was a horrible time for everyone in Manhattan, in New York at that time. And the lie had the opposite effect. Now people weren't looking for Sneha alive. They were looking for her dead in the rubble. Nobody assumed that she could have run towards the towers and survived. Ultimately, it just slowed the search for Sneha even more. As a last resort, Ron actually hires a private investigator to look into Sneha's disappearance. Now, it was the private investigator that actually found the CCTV footage of Sneha in Century 21. But he also found some additional footage, some footage from 8:43 on the morning of September 11th, which may have suggested that Sneha returned to the apartment building that morning. It's footage from the lobby of the apartment building, and a woman who was very much dressed in similar clothes that Sneha was wearing the day before and had similar mannerisms walked into the lobby, goes towards the elevator and presses the button. She stood there for a few minutes and then suddenly walks out. However, in the footage you can't see the woman's face. It was early morning, the sun was shining brightly into the lobby and the exposure was too high. So although you could kind of figure out what the woman was wearing and kind of see her movements, you couldn't see details of her face. Ron has said that he thinks it's his wife in the footage, but he can't 100% say. However, NYPD officials have said that it was 100% Sneha. In this case, I would probably personally trust the husband more than people who didn't know her. If he wasn't 100% sure it was his wife, then we really can't say that it definitely was. But what we do know is this woman walked in without shopping bags, by the way. Bear in mind that Sneha had 2 shopping bags from the day before. She walks in, clearly hears the disturbance, and then walks back out. And she walks back out at about the same time that the first plane would have hit the tower. I'm sure most of you have seen that famous footage of Manhattan after the North Tower was hit. Everyone just stood in the street staring up at the sky. People thought the world was coming to an end. It was absolutely horrifying. And it's very likely that Sneha, or whoever this woman was in the lobby, just walked outside to look up at the tower. However, Sneha was a doctor, she was a medical professional, and it would have been part of her instinct to run towards the tower to help people. Now, this woman doesn't come back into the lobby after this. Now, Sneha wore disposable contact lenses. Her glasses were still in the apartment, alongside her driving license, passport, and all of her credit cards. The only credit card she had on her at the time was her husband's American Express, and it's never been used since the shopping spree at Century 21. Something else to bear in mind with this security footage of the lobby of the apartment building is that nobody has ever actually seen it. Ron has refused to release the PI's files on this case, and we don't really know why this is. I can only assume there is something in those files that Ron does not want people to know or see. It's also important to note that the entire narrative of Sneha's disappearance up to this point has only come from Ron and her close family. Who's to say that the security footage in the lobby even exists if nobody's seen it? Eventually, the NYPD start to look into Sneha's disappearance. They're working through each missing person one by one, and eventually they do get to Sneha. Well, they delved right into Sneha's life and uncovered a load of details that Ron hadn't made public, and it really did not paint Sneha in the best light. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, earlier in the year her residence at Cabrini Medical Centre had actually come to an end. Now, the way that these internships, residencies work is that you have to do a 3-year sort of course, I suppose, and at the end of each year your contract gets renewed. And at the end of Sneha's 2nd year, her contract with Cabrini did not get renewed. Effectively, she was fired. Now, the reason that they cited for this was tardiness and alcohol-related issues. Now, Sneha's family deny that this is the reason she was let go. They say that she was let go because she was a whistleblower talking about racial and sexist biases at the hospital at that time. Cabrini hit back at this, however, and say that they have no report of Sneha making any sexual harassment allegations. I think this is a good time to point out that this was Sneha, an Indian American woman working in a hospital in the early 2000s, and she probably would have faced a lot of racism and sexism that just came with the role, and I think that was something that she probably expected. So I'm not sure if she was sexually harassed that she would have reported it, because I'm sure at this time, as a lot of other people in this profession and a lot of women in a lot of professions, they just expected it to come along with the job. Sexual harassment was kind of something that was just going to happen. And I'm not saying it definitely did happen to her. It may have done or may not, but I think Cabrini turning around saying that she never made any allegations doesn't mean it didn't happen. Because although in today's day and age, 2018, women are persuaded to come forward when they are sexually harassed, I don't think this was so much the case back in the early 2000s. So shortly after Sneha's dismissed from Cabrini Medical Centre, she's on a night out with all her former colleagues, and this night out actually ends up with Sneha spending a night in jail. I think it can be assumed that she was very much blowing off steam at this point. She'd just been fired, her life wasn't going the way that she wanted it to. According to Cabrini, she already had a problem with alcohol, so I think she just totally let loose and ended up in jail for the night. Now, we don't know why she ended up in jail. However, that night whilst in jail, she complained to a police officer that she'd been sexually abused that night. She said that a former co-worker had touched her inappropriately. Now, if this is true, I think it's very likely that this could be the reason that Sneha did end up in jail. Maybe she did get touched, maybe somebody pinched her bum as she walked past or touched her in a way she didn't like. She'd been drinking and she just turned around and started a fight, maybe hit them or something like that. However, the prosecutor dealing with the case actually dropped the sexual abuse charge and instead charged Sneha with filing a false police report. Now, I don't know why the prosecutor did this, and I can only assume they had a very good reason to do so. Because it would have been a lot easier for them to just drop the charge and that's it, move on, Sneha can continue with her life. But for the prosecutor to turn around and charge her with filing a false police report, it must have been something pretty serious. And I'm just going to add this in here because I know I'll probably get a comment or two about it if I don't. It could also be a racial bias against Sneha. She was an Indian American woman. Now, the prosecutor did offer to drop the charge if Sneha recanted her allegation, but Sneha absolutely point blank refused, and therefore she spent another night in jail. Now, this incident doesn't put Sneha off alcohol, but it does put her off attending straight bars. So she starts attending lesbian bars. Now, I think it's safe to assume here that this started because Sneha felt safer in the company of other women, no men around to grope her or abuse her or make her feel uncomfortable. As a woman, I'm sure we've all felt like this. There's nothing worse than being in a club and just having guys leer at you. Gay and lesbian bars, for many reasons, are so much better than straight bars. Not being groped is just one of the little perks. However, lesbian bars in New York are very few and far between. Nowadays, there are basically none. I can think of 2, maybe 3. Back in the early 2000s, there were a few more, but still there weren't that many. Sneha really would have had to have done her research to find out where's the best places to go for this. Now, Sneha attending lesbian bars was one thing. However, she actually started to go home with women that she met there. Now, Ron, possibly naively, insists that it was all totally innocent, saying that Sneha would just paint and talk and listen to music with these women and she'd arrive home the next day. He said that once she went out and came home covered head to toe in paint because her and this woman had just spent all night painting. Now, of course, definitely could be totally innocent. But is there a chance that Sneha was bisexual? Now, it is possible that Sneha grew up very repressed about her sexuality. It happened. She was Indian. She was very much involved in Indian culture. That's where she grew up. Now, I don't know exactly where India stands on LGBT issues. So if any of you are Indian and can shed light on that, then please let me know. But I'm guessing it's like the majority of the rest of the world, and LGBT is frowned upon. Now, Sneha was going through a difficult time. She'd lost her job, she was drinking a lot, she had this court case to worry about, and maybe she just let loose and decided to experiment with her sexuality. Now, don't get me wrong, very up for people experimenting with their sexuality, but Sneha was a married woman, and I have no doubt that her husband probably wouldn't have been happy if he'd found out about it, whether she was cheating with a man or a woman. Like I said, going to lesbian bars is one thing, they're a great place, but actually going home with a woman that you meet there, it becomes significantly less innocent. Do I think Sneha's possible bisexuality led to her death? Unlikely, but I think it's something that probably should be explored, because even though LGBT rights have come such a long way, this was still 2001 and homosexuality is still very much frowned upon, and it's very possible that Sneha could have gone out to a lesbian bar and maybe somebody saw her who didn't like it and she got involved in a fight and maybe ended up dying. Maybe she went back to the wrong woman's house, or maybe she didn't go back to a woman's house, maybe she went back to a man's house and something happened there. Hundreds of thousands of LGBT people all across the world come to harm because of their sexuality. And as much as a lot of people live in a world where they don't see that happening, it does happen, and it's a stark reality. Now, Sneha's family, Ron included, have always denied there was a possibility that Sneha was bisexual. And it's quite clear that they have a problem with it. Ron's actual quote about it was, "These allegations of her being bisexual are ridiculous. Because we live in a conservative lifestyle, it doesn't mean anything abnormal is going on." I have massive problems with the word abnormal being used there, suggesting that anybody who's not straight isn't normal. Maybe I'm looking into it too much, but I could go on about this for hours. But I think it's clear that even if she was bisexual, her family wouldn't be likely to admit it. And they've also denied her alcoholism, her possible drug abuse as well. Maybe it's a possible culture thing, maybe they just don't want to think about their daughter in that way. And it also makes me think that the reason that Ron has not released these PI files is because there is something in there that he doesn't want people to see, possibly evidence of her bisexuality. A further evidence of this is in a police report, and in the police report it says that John, Sneha's younger brother, walked in on his then girlfriend's, now wife, and Sneha having sex. And John has completely denied this. He said that it never happened and he definitely never said it to the police. And this is very strange. So either John did say it and he's now completely denying it, or the police have made it up. And I'm not sure why the police would make that up. Okay, so now let's talk about Sneha's problem with alcohol. Now, she had lost her internship at Cabrini due to her alcoholism. That has been very widely stated. And so she gets a job at St Vincent's Medical Centre. Now, I wouldn't think it would be that easy for a doctor to get another job after they've been dealing with substance abuse problems. But St Vincent's Medical Centre do offer her the job. But they say to her that she needs to attend substance abuse counselling once a week. But she starts to miss these counselling sessions, and therefore she's actually suspended from her job. I don't know how long she was suspended for, but I can assume that by the time she disappeared, she was actually back working, because it said in quite a few sources that the 10th and 11th, she just had days off. She wasn't in suspension, she just had time off. So I assume that she was back at her job by this point. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the morning of September 10th, which I purposely missed out before because I feel like you had to have a bit of background to understand this bit. So on the morning of September 10th, Sneha had her court date. This was the court date for the allegation against her of filing a false police report, and it was about 10 AM that she had to attend. So she turns up with Ron and she pleads not guilty. I'm not sure exactly what happened in the courtroom, but what I can tell you is that police reports afterwards stated that Sneha and Ron go into sort of the lobby of the courthouse and they have an explosive argument. Now, Ron has always denied this and said this argument doesn't happen, the police are lying, but the police report says that they had a massive argument about her alcohol problem, drug abuse, and bisexual activity. Now, Sneha storms out of the courthouse, leaving Ron stood there. But Ron has actually always said that day the two of them went for lunch together. So either they made up and then they went for lunch before heading back to the apartment, and then Ron left for work about 1 PM, or Ron's lying about that. However, Ron has said in an interview that they went back to the apartment after lunch and he left for work but realised he forgot his key, so had to turn around, go back to the apartment, and he said it was a blessing that he forgot his key because it meant he could go back to his apartment and give his wife one last kiss. Maybe they did have an argument and maybe they just made up very quickly, maybe they didn't hold grudges. But I find it hard to believe they have an explosive argument about Sneha being bisexual, drugs, alcohol, which are all very big issues in a marriage if Sneha was cheating on him. But he's saying that he got to go back and give her another kiss before he left, which possibly true. Maybe they just made up, but it seems very strange. But Ron has always insisted that the police report is lying and that this didn't happen at all. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure why the police would file a report about a couple having an argument in a courthouse. I'm not sure they were doing anything illegal. Like, is that just standard? Would the police just write it down, or would something more official have to be filed? I'm not sure how that would work, so I'm not sure how the police have that argument on record. Maybe it's just part of court records. But also, I think in this case, the police work is possibly poor. They didn't find Sneha, they didn't jump into action as fast as they probably should have done. And in any other case, I would condemn the police for this, but considering what they dealt with in the aftermath of 9/11, I think they can possibly be excused for not searching for Sneha as hard as they should have done, because they had 9,000 other reports to look through as well. So maybe the police are making all this stuff up about Sneha to cover their own backs, but they don't really need to. They have an excuse right there. Are all of these things, her alcoholism, possible drug abuse, bisexuality, affairs, linked to her death? Or are none of these things linked to her death even slightly, and was she just a victim of 9/11? Now, Sneha's family have fought for years for Sneha's name to be included on the list of 9/11 deaths. They believe that it was her in the footage in the lobby, and that being a doctor, she rushed to help and she died a hero, which I think having anyone go missing is horrible, and to think of them as dead is difficult. It must help them and help their grief if they think that she died being a hero. So she was originally listed as a victim of 9/11. However, the courts took her off because they ruled that there was actually no evidence that she was even alive on 9/11. In November 2005, the courts again ruled that Sneha's official date of death is the 10th of September 2014. New York law states that somebody's date of death is officially 3 years from the date they were last seen, and the day she was last seen was 10th of September 2001, so 10th September 2004 became her official date of death. However, her family kept on fighting, and in 2008 this was overturned and she was officially listed as one of the victims of 9/11. They dismissed the police's reports that she led a double life and determined that she rushed to the aid of victims and was hit by falling debris. She officially became 2,751st victim of the 9/11 attacks. And I think this is indeed very possible. She either ran to help victims and was hit by falling debris. A lot of people say that she ran into one of the towers to help people. I don't think this is as likely because nobody thought the towers would fall. This is the thing. It was hit by the plane and nobody thought the towers would come down like they did. And ignore all the conspiracy theories about how the towers just collapsed in on themselves. The debris fell for blocks. Trinity Church, which was 4 blocks away, had to be completely repaired because it was so ruined by the falling debris. Things were flying everywhere, so maybe Sneha didn't even get that close to the towers before she was hit by something. Maybe she did run into the tower to try and help, which I don't think would be likely, but it is a possibility. A lot of people say this isn't possible because nobody was allowed near the towers, but what you've got to understand is Sneha lived so close. She would have been there within minutes, if not seconds, and so nobody would have been there to stop her running into a tower. But there's also the third possibility. Remember how earlier I said that Sneha was going to check out the restaurant at the top of the North Tower? Maybe she did spend all night out, stayed around somebody's apartment, and then she was walking home, and as she's walking home she walks past the North Tower and thinks, oh, I need to go up to the restaurant and see. I don't know if the restaurant was open for breakfast, possibly only business meetings, but maybe Sneha just got in the elevator and went up to the top. After the attack, the medical examiner collected 10,000 bone and tissue fragments, which to this day they've never been able to identify. And as of today, there are still 1,112 victims who have not been identified. Sneha, possibly one of them. The repository for all of the unidentified remains of the attacks is actually located inside the 9/11 Memorial Museum. The museum is at the bedrock of the 2 towers. I've been there a couple of times and it is absolutely chilling. It is unlike anywhere I've ever been. You can almost feel the ghosts of almost 3,000 people within these walls. It is something which I think everyone should do in their lifetime, but it was also something that I would never want to do again. And last time I was there, I actually spotted a tiny little plaque. It's about this big, located in one of the walls. And on the plaque it says that behind this wall are the unidentified remains of the victims of 9/11. And only in doing the research for this case have I realised that they are actually unidentified remains and they are behind that wall. And I read it, but it didn't click that there are so many unidentified people from these attacks, so many people who don't have their names to their remaining body parts, and there's just chilling is the only word I can use to describe it. I would totally recommend if you are ever in New York, do the Memorial Museum. It is incredible how well they've done it, and it also shows you the magnitude of the situation. There's a piece of steel meters wide which has been bent in half by the nose of the plane, by the fire, by the heat. It is horrible. As Sneha's name was added to the list of victims so many years later, Ron was actually never able to claim from the compensation fund for the victims. Based on Sneha's age and potential earnings, Ron could have claimed anywhere between $3 and $4 million from this compensation fund, and I'm sure that he would rather have his wife still alive than have this money, but he was never able to claim because he couldn't produce a death certificate until years later. So let's talk about some theories. I've already talked about the main theory here, that Sneha was a victim of the 9/11 attacks. Personally, I think it's most likely that she rushed to the scene using her medical credentials and tried to help people before being hit by falling debris. A lot of people do say, however, that if this was the case, it's very likely that her body would have been found, which I do kind of agree with. But you've got to remember, this falling debris was burning. It was engine oil. It was so hot. It's very likely that she would have got close to the towers. It's not like she would have been hit blocks away, I don't think. I think she would have been hit very close to the towers, possibly just outside. And as the buildings fell, it possibly covered her body. The last fire from the attack was put out 100 days later on the 20th of December. And in the depths of this fire, it was burning 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,100-ish degrees Celsius, I think. It was burning so hot, so if Sneha was there and if she was close to the tower, it's very possible she was buried and then burned. If the woman in the CCTV in the lobby was Sneha, the only thing I question is where were her shopping bags, her 2 bags. If she did go out drinking the night before, which is very probable, it's likely that she just lost them or forgot them. They've never been found, but in the aftermath of 9/11, I don't think people would have thought much about a shopping bag being left there. Maybe she left it around whoever's house she stayed the previous night, but whoever's house she stayed around, they have not come forward either. We have no idea where she was. I would like to think that nothing else in this case is relevant. The alcoholism, the possible drug abuse, the bisexuality, the affairs. I would like to think that none of that is of any relevance at all to Sneha's disappearance, and that at the end of the day she was just a compassionate woman who wanted to help people and ran towards the burning tower. But we've got to explore the other options as well. One of the main options is that she possibly ran away. Now, if she was running away, it's likely that it would have been pre-planned. She was way too smart to just up and leave. She would have had to have had something prepared. Now, the private investigator did look into this possibility and looked at her internet history, and nothing came up whatsoever. But of course, it's possible that Sneha used like internet cafes or library computers or something like that. But I do think she would have left some trace behind her. She was clearly unhappy with her life. Like, these weren't the signs of a happy woman. She was drinking a lot. She was staying around random people's houses. Best case scenario, having affairs. Worst case scenario, she'd lost her job. She was suspended from her new job. She was just very unhappy, clearly struggling with a lot in her life. Maybe her marriage wasn't as great as Ron has made it seem either, and maybe she just wanted to start afresh and get out of there. And maybe 9/11 for her would have just been a good distraction, and in that split second, she just decides, now is the moment, I need to get out. And it would have been a split second decision. She would have had to have decided there and then that she was going. But was she possibly going with somebody else? Did she possibly have a lover that she had planned to escape with, and the two of them went together? Maybe they didn't even escape on 9/11. Maybe they escaped the day before on the 10th, and then 9/11 happened and it just made it seem like she had died there. But if she had tried to escape on the 11th of September, it wouldn't have been easy. This is an entire city that went into lockdown. It was gridlock traffic. I said that it took 6 hours for Ron to get from the Bronx down to Lower Manhattan. It was absolute chaos. The tunnels were shut, the bridges were gridlocked with traffic. Nobody could get in or out. A few people did, don't get me wrong, but most people were stuck on trains, stuck on public transport. Nobody could get out of the city. So unless Sneha possibly laid low at somebody else's house and then escaped to the city days later, I don't think it would have been that possible. If it had happened, she would have been very lucky. Now, like I said, her passport, driver's license, and all of her credit cards were still in the apartment. Do I think she would have taken those if she was running away? Maybe. She was very smart, so maybe she knew how to get hold of fake or new passports and stuff. Also, the possibility that she was murdered, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe it was somebody who saw her with another woman and took action. She lived very, very close to the Hudson River, so it wouldn't have been hard for somebody to possibly weigh her body down and throw her in the river. And then in the aftermath of 9/11, she was just never really found. Maybe she was, and maybe nobody really looked into it, just assumed she was a victim of the attack. It is possible that she was murdered. Maybe it was just literally a random attack. She was walking home late at night and somebody hurt her. And whoever murdered her, it would just been very good and coincidental timing for them that the attack happened the next day and the city was chaos. There's also the possibility that she just went to the wrong stranger's house and ended up getting hurt. I mean, I suppose there's only so many times that you can go back to random people's houses and not come into any danger. I can't talk too in depth about this theory because in reality, there's no evidence to suggest anything in this case. Most of the evidence points towards the fact that she most likely died in the 9/11 attacks. All of the other theories are just that, they're just theories, there's nothing to suggest it. I'm also going to talk about Ron and her family, who could also be suspects. Again, not that there is anything to point towards this being true, but it is something that I feel I should cover. Maybe their marriage was very unhappy and Ron had found out about everything Sneha was doing, and when he arrived home that night after work, they got into another argument, and maybe, whether intentionally or unintentionally, Sneha got hurt. I do find this very unlikely though, because like I said, Ron arrived home about midnight, he had to leave for work at 6 AM. That's a 6-hour window. I suppose the call to his own phone at 4 AM is a little bit suspicious, but also if he is just calling to check his voicemail to see if his wife's called, it's not that suspicious. I just feel like the timing in this wouldn't really work. A lot of people say it's very suspicious that Ron has spent so many years trying to paint Sneha as the perfect woman, beautiful, smart, kind, compassionate, and he never mentioned any of this other stuff, but I don't think that's strange. I really don't. I think when somebody dies or somebody goes missing, you don't want to remember the bad things about them, because at the end of the day, if you love them, that's all you're going to remember. And Sneha wasn't a horrible person. She had her flaws, as we all do, but she was kind, she was compassionate, she was a doctor, she dedicated her entire life to helping other people. He also hired a PI, which I think would be a silly move if you had murdered your wife yourself, because a PI would most likely find out if he had done that. Also be another member of her family, possibly one of her brothers. Her and her brother John had actually fallen out from what I read a few weeks beforehand, so they hadn't actually spoken in weeks, which kind of makes John's report on the media about him being on the phone to Sneha when she disappeared all that more suspicious, I suppose. But again, I'm not convinced. There's no evidence to suggest that she was hurt by a family member. Maybe it was a cultural pride kind of thing. You do hear about honour killings, but I don't think that was something. There's nothing to suggest it. Police, of course, have looked into both Ron and all of Sneha's family, and Ron was actually a suspect for quite a while, but in the end they sort of said that he had nothing to do with it. I'm sure they had their reasons for doing so, and therefore we can't look at Ron as a suspect. I always say this in my mysteries, that if the police have said that somebody's not a suspect, then we can't say it. I suppose for me it's more of like a legal perspective thing. I can't go around saying like this person did it when the police have quite clearly said they haven't. But I do think there's something to be said that when we look at a case and see there's no evidence, you've got to agree with the police when they say a person's not a suspect. Also, I think this is another good time to point out that the entire narrative of this story has come from Ron and Sneha's family. There's nobody else who has told this story apart from them. Ron was very close and still is with Sneha's family. When Sneha died, he actually moved to upstate New York to move in with Sneha's family. He said he did it for the emotional and financial support, and even though now, years later, he's remarried, he's got children with this other woman, he still visits Sneha's family on a regular basis. And the very last theory I want to quickly touch on here is suicide. There's very much a possibility that Sneha ended her own life. I think it's quite clear that she was very unhappy, she was going through a very difficult time, and she may have committed suicide, but we have no evidence of this because a body has never been found, but it is a possibility. I'm not going to go and rehash all of the reasons why it could be a possibility. I've mentioned it a million times in this video, but I don't think we can discount it. Maybe not immediately, but you would think that 17 years later, in a city with 6 million people living in it, somebody would have come across her body by now, but nobody ever has. Personally, I don't think Sneha's personal life has much to do with her disappearance. I do think that she was a victim of the 9/11 attack. It's what makes most sense in this case. Whether she was walking past and got hit by debris, or was rushing to help somebody else, or was even in the tower herself, I do think that that's where she came to her end. Maybe one day Sneha's remains will be identified via DNA. New technology is being released all of the time, and maybe one day they'll be able to link some of the 10,000 remains they have in the repository to Sneha. The most recent identification came in just August last year, August 2017, where they finally managed to link up a missing person's name with the DNA. Her family pinned hope on Sneha's jewellery. She always wore her wedding band, her engagement ring, diamond earring, and her minu, which was a traditional pendant given to her by her husband at her wedding. And although gold, silver, platinum would have melted in the 2000-degree heat, diamonds would have survived. The city unearthed 1,350 pieces of jewellery from the rubble. And Sneha's family have received a letter from the city saying that they might have Sneha's jewellery within that, but honestly it doesn't really mean much. They might have thousands of people's jewellery, but they can't identify it. Her family have found peace in the fact that she died a hero at 9/11 helping people. And like I said, there's no evidence to suggest that she died any other way. This is the most likely scenario here. But I would love to hear what you guys think in this case. Do you think it's also most likely she died at 9/11? Either way, it's such a sad case, and every single victim of the 9/11 attacks deserve to have their stories told, as Sneha's has been. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I'd really like it if you could give this video a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to my channel down below. I just want to say a really quick thank you so much for 60,000 subscribers. I finally hit it. It's very exciting. I can't believe how much my channel is growing recently, and it's thanks to you guys and your interest in these cases. It really is just incredible, so thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.